Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to 22 Panels. Sitting second chair with me tonight is my friend Brit Payne, uh, and that's because Elliott Mondry of why can't I remember the name of your comic right now? I should have pulled that up. Elliott, introduce your comic. So
Hi, everyone. My name is Elliott Mondry. I'm the writer and creator of the comic book You Never Know, published by our own company, Calamity Comics, which I am the co-owner with Alicia Madden.
and the next Kickstarter will be starting soon, so people should go and sign up to be notified. But we've got Elliot here today, um, and Britt sitting in because Elliot is also um, a lawyer that helps out with comic creators and writes on various things and all that fun stuff. And I thought it'd be a good thing to talk about some of the legal things that comic creators should know. Um, what rights they have, what they should watch out for, what they should jump at, what they should put their foots down for. And Britt will know better questions to ask. But
Maybe.
I thought it was cool that Elliot was willing to come talk about this with me, and that much happier that Britt, who actually knows enough of the law to be more dangerous than me. I know only enough of the law to be truly dangerous, whereas Britt can like ground everything. I'll be sitting there going, "Well, why don't they get the billions?" And
That's the billion
billions
dollar
weren't made, and
question.
I'm like, I don't care.
It will depend on the contract, which is the most lawyer response you can have is it depends.
So I will start out with one really simple question. As a lawyer that has obviously, I mean, from talking to you, I know you do a lot of litigation, so a lot of stuff after the fact. So I want to go the other direction to start with. What thing would you tell comic creators out of the gate to like avoid doing to avoid needing you to go after people after the fact? Like what big thing should they be looking at in contracts? Obviously, there are lots of small things, but like, what's your biggest piece of advice for a young comic creator? And it's allowed to be hire a lawyer to look at your contract. But
You've pretty much got the answer right there. I'll take it in two parts. The first blanket statement I would say is hire an attorney. Too many people will run things through AI nowadays and think that that's sufficient and be like, oh yeah, ChatGPT told me that this was a good contract because of XYZ. No, that's not how that works. There are people who are professionals who know what to look for, intricacies in contracts. Like you said, big things, small things, it doesn't matter. To have that peace of mind that an attorney read that work is invaluable. I mean, might pay a couple $100 to have an attorney read your contract, but you could save hundreds of thousands down the road by not losing out on rights or having future litigation because you signed one wrong part of a contract. If we're getting more specific into it, the biggest thing I tend to look at it, which comes up a lot with my clients, is intellectual property disputes. Did they sign away the intellectual property rights to their books? Did they sign away printing rights, media rights, or what aspects of the intellectual property are they retaining? And the second part of that would be obviously what happens in the event of breach. Because some clients will sign a mediation agreement or not mediation, arbitration agreement where they say in the event of breach, they're limited to only arbitration and in this state, as opposed to if it's not in there, they can kind of control the terms or they can just file suit in court. So the three-step will be first, hire a lawyer. If you don't hire a lawyer, look out for intellectual property rights and what happens to the rights of your book. And one, two, three would be see what happens in the event of breach and then the form selection clauses of where either a lawsuit or arbitration would take place. Um, so just hire a lawyer. It makes life easier for everybody, and then we don't have to try to fix the mess on the back end.
well, I am going to ask a quick follow-up just because I've
Mhm.
talked to enough creators at enough different levels that the $200 that you tossed out is like a real deterrent
Mhm.
for a large number of comic creators. You know,
It is.
we're often talking people who live paycheck to paycheck on
Mhm.
whatever job that gives them enough time to make their comics, and like having to
Mhm.
come up with $200 up front is not an easy thing. So like what's your piece of advice to them? What are they looking to avoid?
Um, I'm going to try to answer the question how I understand it. If I'm
Right.
answering it wrong, please let me know. But to me, anything
Well, that's
worth
why I have two lawyers here.
Thank you, counsel. Anything, I always say anything worth creating is worth protecting. If you're with with a publishing company who's presenting you a contract, obviously they see something in you. And, I don't necessarily believe that publishing companies have the creator's best interest at heart because it's a business at the end of the day. And you have to look at it as a business transaction as opposed to this is my ticket to freedom or to getting my dreams created. Because it very well could be, but it could also be taken away very quickly. So what is the two, three, four, $500, whatever it costs. Every attorney has different fees. Discuss with your lawyer and consult accordingly. But
So you're saying go sell some blood.
well, I my opinion is whatever you pay is worth the peace of mind and
Right.
potential hardship down the road that you would face without having had a lawyer read that contract. Because worst case scenario, you have an attorney read it and say, it's good, you're safe to sign it, and then you get to live happily ever after with the comic book creator having your book published with the publishing company and having your book published and nothing goes wrong. If you don't do that and you miss one clause now and you all of a sudden want your book back,
Right.
you may be out thousands upon thousands of dollars when all you have to do is pay a couple $100 up front to make sure everything was okay. So it
Right.
is
I mean, it's
expensive, but
just,
it's an
and,
investment like anything else.
and you know this from your own comic. Like we also live in a world where like the return on some books isn't actually much more than a couple $100 in the short term.
But you
You,
can't think in the short term. You have to think in the long term. And that's the unfortunate part where,
you
you don't
can
want to
you
think
can
10,
try
20
to
years
think in
down
the
the
long
road.
term. That's much easier to do when next month's rent is paid. You know, I mean, it's a balancing act, is what I'm saying. So,
Elliot,
um,
this is Brit. Who are young creators and creators doing their first works that they're trying to get published? Who are they doing deals with?
The companies, you mean? Or
Yeah, who's on the other side of the table? Like whose contracts are you evaluating? You know, sometimes it's going to be DC and Marvel, and sometimes it's going to be a publisher, and sometimes it's just going to be a print house. Sometimes I guess it's a writer doing a deal with an artist. Like who are on either side of these agreements that you're dealing with sometimes?
so typically the ones I've read have typically been with publishers. So where they're contracted for, X amount of pages, either with an artist or with a writer for a series. I've also read works, just standard work for hires with between artists and writers. Those tend to not be as lucrative. It's more just somebody wants peace of mind that they're gonna own whatever they pay out for. But typically, it's the publishing company as opposed to the printing company because the publishing company is going to be the one who's taking on all the expenses and all that stuff. They just want to have the story to be able to put out there, and then they deal with all the money on that end as well. So all this to say, it's typically the publisher as opposed to the printing company that I at least deal with with my clients.
And then in your practice, when you get into litigation, who typically is on the other side? If you're
Again, it's
Do you generally represent creators? And then if that's true, then who tends to be on the other side? Not anybody specific, not a specific company, but what type of company?
Oh, so I typically represent the creators of the work, and on the other side is their publisher, whoever put the book out, whoever paid for, to have it created, published, all that stuff. Whoever the one is putting out the issues, on the month to month or week to week basis, that's the individual who's usually on the other side for my clients.
What are you guys usually fighting over? What's the thing that gets somebody to walk into your office for litigation purposes and say, "Ugh, I'm in this pickle, Elliot, can you help me?"
It's usually I have this contract. I want the rights back to my book. Okay, great. Let's do the contract, and they'll have signed their rights away for some reason. So,
Mhm.
or there's a provision in the contract where you know, when the book is published, or then the rights are essentially given up, or upon publication they lose the rights, or they give the rights up. There's a million different ways it's phrased, but typically it's over the intellectual property of the book and the publishing rights. So then the client will usually
Mhm.
want that back in order to go in a different direction with the publication. But the problem is they sign
Mhm.
the rights away. So how do you do that? You have to see if there's some form of breach involved. And then that's where the fun begins.
Mhm.
How does this is the complete layman's thing, but like a, a couple of mid-level comic companies in the last few years have
Mhm.
filed bankruptcy and not paid artists and also not had their books on the shelves. And I know from knowing a number of these people that often they also don't have the options to take them anywhere. So their work is tied up in companies that don't have the wherewithal to publish it and don't have the wherewithal to pay them, and they don't have the ability to take it somewhere else to publish it to make money. Like, how does the law get complicated in those cases?
In that instance, and if I'm not right on this, please let me
Well,
know.
I have
My
an exciting I have a story from 30 years ago, but I
excellent.
don't I don't know the current one. So if you want to do the old one first, I'll tell that one. If you want to do the current one, you can.
I'll start current and then you give us the
Yeah.
classic. So my understanding is, so when there's if a book is wrapped up in bankruptcy proceedings, it depends on how the language of the contract with the creators, and two, there's something that has to do. I just had a consultation about something like this that I had to do ad nauseum research on, where it was basically, it had to do with what part of bankruptcy it was in, and then what, like, you have to go within the actual bankruptcy proceedings to see if the book itself was on a certain list of books that were released during the bankruptcy. And if they were, then the rights would revert back. If not, the company had to go finish through bankruptcy proceedings and then could determine what to do with the book or not. So all this to say, it just
Right.
depends on where the company is at in bankruptcy proceedings in that instance, and what the original contract said.
I mean,
Yeah, and a
this is one
bankruptcy
of those
proceeding
places that I
is
just get frustrated as a reader, where it's like, I want to recommend this book, and you can't buy it right now.
But you were saying about
yeah.
bankruptcy.
Well, a bankruptcy proceeding is basically a company has gotten in over their skis, out over their skis, and they can't pay their bills. They have too many debtors, and they feel like they want to have an orderly wind down of the company, or at least of the debt. So they ask the court. They say, "Hey, will you help us figure all this out?" So that the court then comes in and says, okay, we got these standard procedures. This debt is in line in front of that debt. And we're going to try and make sure maybe everybody doesn't get all their money back, but you get a certain amount of your money back. And you try to preserve the company in theory so that there's not waste, So those are a lot of the things that the courts take into consideration in bankruptcy. In a case involving Marvel many years ago out of Georgia, I think it was around 1990. I haven't looked at this case in a while, but there were Marvel had declared bankruptcy, and so they were trying to figure out how to dole out the assets in a way that got as much of the debt repaid as possible. So that's the goal of the court: get as much of the debt repaid as possible. They are not copyright attorneys, especially not in Georgia, or copyright judges in Georgia. They are bankruptcy judges. So they're just trying to. Their goal basically is to sweep up as many assets as possible so that they have more to divvy up. And in doing that, they swept up four characters that Marv Wolfman had created, that he felt he had created independently of Marvel, and that they belonged to him, not to Marvel, that they were not works made for hire owned by the company that solicited them, independent creations that were then sold. And he felt that he should get those back in this bankruptcy proceeding. And the bankruptcy judge was just like, no, these four characters, he did a perfunctory and I think inadequate analysis of copyright law that The big one that really bothered me was Nova. So if you think about the character Nova from Marvel, he's got a yellow helmet, and he's got kind of a blue vest and yellow pants, and he's got a couple of stars on his chest and a sort of an atomic looking logo and stuff. And he's named Richard Rider, and he has blast powers and he flies through space. So Mark Wolfman created that character, and it was called Black Nova, I believe, in a black and white fanzine prior to it coming to Marvel. And if you compare the two characters, you would say that the one infringed the other. You would say that basically the character had been created separately, and then once it got to Marvel, he modified it and released it as Nova. So in the 70s, when things were more loosey-goosey with copyright law, and when there was a notion that you could make $1 billion movie out of these things, they didn't paper everything as well as they might have. And so in this case, I think copyright law was disserved by the decision of this bankruptcy court in Georgia. But sometimes that's just what happens. It's like, what are the needs of this particular circumstance? How do we best satisfy the needs? And it isn't necessarily fair, especially looking in a when you're looking at your particular needs as a consumer of the product, which we all are of comic books. So that's what ends up making things a little complicated. Is that's not what the concern. The bankruptcy court is not concerned in getting the next book out on time or like feeding you the story you want to read. It's in looking at it as if it's any kind of business, and it's got debtors that need to be best compensated and trying not to have waste. Sometimes it involves running down the company altogether, but sometimes it involves trying to preserve the company that it comes out of bankruptcy and gets to stay operating so that it can maybe better either serve the public or repay its debtors. And that ends up, it becomes, lawyery complicated pretty quickly, and people are very angry.
And then it takes time, a lot of time, because bankruptcy proceedings are about as fast as a snail through peanut butter.
Along those lines, though, and a couple of very high-profile bankruptcies in recent years, one of a publisher, one of a distributor. It seems like creators in the case of the publisher and publishers in the case of the distributor have fallen awfully low on the totem pole of people that need to get paid. How do those, I mean, do either of you, I know, I don't think either of you specialize in bankruptcy law, so feel free to say, not my area, but like, how do they decide who gets paid first? How money gets paid out? I mean, I mean, in the distributor case, they literally had consignment product that they're not giving back to publishing companies, and it's getting supported by at least at some levels. I don't know what the last ruling was, but at some levels it was being supported by the court that they not give it back because they had debts to banks that shouldn't have loaned them money, frankly. But I mean, they took out some really big loans after the writing was on the wall, and that those loans were coming ahead of giving product back to company or paying companies for product that they'd sold, etc. I mean, how does that wind up? I mean, do either of you know anything about how those decisions are made? Because they seem really weird to me.
I mean,
Like what Elliot
I
was saying,
don't.
it's ornate. It's ornate. It's case by case, unfortunately, and there are things going on that aren't always made public, of course, and it can just be hard to know.
And
Right.
also it just varies based on each business's individual structure as well. So
Okay.
they would also determine that in the bylaws and all that fun stuff. So they'd have to look through that, and then the courts to look at course of conduct, the wind up, all that stuff, and then how to best divvy everything up based on the business structure.
Fun stuff that makes for wonderful podcasts. So we're gonna ask the in between question, because you're both big comics fans too. Two questions. First, I know you're both big comics fans. So when you read about this stuff in the news, how much does your lawyer head go on? How much, or do you go, oh, I don't want my lawyer head to go on. This is going on. I don't want to know about it. I just want to think about But then follow up and more fun question. I'm certain that you notice anytime where the law is actually in comic stories. Tell me an example of a lawyer in a comic book that you either went right on, that's cool, or what the fuck is going on with this? And they never set foot inside a courtroom.
There are two
So
questions in there, and I already
there were
forgot
three
the first
questions.
one. So there were three
Three
questions, and I
questions.
forgot the first two then. So
Okay,
I will at least
okay,
answer the most recent one.
okay.
The first one
The
is when a big news story pops out, do we follow it?
okay,
The third question was when do they get it wrong? And I missed the
yes,
middle question.
The middle question was, have you ever seen a time where they got it right? And we
okay.
really, really appreciated it because, oh, wow, that guy did his research because that's exactly how a lawyer would handle this.
I'd say as far as like the news goes, I'm always just interested in comic books and law. So when the two areas kind of get combined, I'm like, ooh, entertainment. So I just find it fascinating. And I don't really, I both have my lawyer hat on, but also as I have my comic fan hat on because I just find it so fascinating because it's my two favorite things in one.
Do you
So
start cold calling potential clients?
no, that's called solicitation and we can't do that.
Oh, you're not allowed to do that. Gotcha. I
No,
didn't
that's
see.
Good
why
I didn't
answer,
even
Ellie.
know that. You're not allowed to go offer your services to people who might need it.
no, you can advertise and you can say, "Hi,
Okay.
I'm a lawyer. If you ever need anything, you could here's my card." But you cannot
Gotcha.
specifically ambulance chase. That is very frowned upon and can get you into a lot of trouble with the bar. So
Gotcha.
for anybody listening, we do not solicit clients. We only advertise our services.
Yeah.
Um, as far as a good friend of mine wrote a
See, this is
comic
stuff
book.
that I didn't know.
Yeah, no, you can't. That's the first thing they teach you on the for the MPRE. You cannot solicit clients. You can't just go up and say, "Hi." It's like the classic ambulance chaser. Someone gets in a car accident. Hey, do you need a lawyer? No, you can't do that. Although Florida does have an exception to that, 'cause I'm also licensed in Florida, where after 30 days you're allowed to send a letter to an individual, um, uh, offering your services, but you cannot do a follow-up letter. That is where Florida is a little different than other states. So for
Oh,
anybody listening, please check your state's rules for professional responsibility and act accordingly. Um, but a good friend of mine wrote a book called Touching Evil, and it is about a lawyer who ends up getting the criminal defense attorney, so my area of expertise, because during the day I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and um, the opening scene was in a courtroom where the lawyer, got they won this big case, and then they had their client taken off of pre-trial with whatever was something like that. I read this a while ago, but I called him up afterwards, and he's like, he wanted me to read it as a defense attorney to understand, to see where he went right, where he went wrong.
is this the Dan Doherty book?
Yeah, Dan Doherty, Touching Evil, and one of the best books I've ever read, as far as stories go. But I did tell him an individual wherever he was in the proceeding of court was improper for how the defendant was taken off of the monitoring or whatever. I just don't remember the details 'cause I don't have the book in front of me, but
Right.
that it was a very small thing that if you weren't an attorney who did law in that area every day, you wouldn't know it. And for me, I was like, this should have been like this, or the way that the attorney spoke with clients, because this was supposedly an attorney who was very seasoned, and the way they were speaking with a client in custody seemed like it was very much like a new lawyer who just got admitted to the bar. And they were speaking overly formal, assuming this was a client that they'd had for 10 plus years. And like, that's not how we talk to clients. We're people about it. We're not like these TV lawyers who's like, Mr. Smith, I'm sorry to inform you right now, but unfortunately your parole has been denied or whatever. Like, that's not how that goes. We're like, hey, Joe, how you doing? Here's what's going on today. Like, it's you treat your clients like they're people because they're people. Also, they're paying your fee for you to be there and comfort them. You're not there to be overly formal and show that you're this like, television type person. So it's just very little things in those instances where I was like, that's not really how I talk to a client, or at least at that stage of a legal career, but to each their own. That's a very long-winded explanation of a comic I've read recently where I was having to analyze the law about it or the legal aspects about it.
To answer those questions in turn, the first one of when something big happens in the comic book world that involves the law, I'll follow the story. I'll listen to the podcast. I'll let people talk about it, and I'll usually do one deep dive. Like I did one deep dive into the bankruptcy of Diamond Distributors, where I'll do one deep dive into some free speech thing that is the comic book legal defense fund stuff. But by and large, I just kind of follow it and sort of see what happens. There's a thing about I'm on the other side of the table sometimes from Elliott. I've worked for Warner Brothers Animation and Nickelodeon, and I did my little stint at DC Comics, and so that's typically my side of the fence is that I'm working for the 500-pound gorilla, and those guys have a lot of confidentiality things that are not just legal but also trade secrets and stuff and things that just for competitive advantage they want to keep secret. And so there are a lot of things that I know or have seen, like I've seen how decisions get made about how a show gets greenlit. That from the outside you sort of speculate it's because of this and that reason, and from the inside you realize, oh, it's a different way of making a decision than I would have considered from the outside. So I have that perspective on it and don't get too caught up in publicly available details because I know they just necessarily can't be complete. I tend to do one deep dive so I'm informed and then otherwise kind of leave it at that. And then the time that somebody got it right in the comics was Mr. Miracle #5, Tom King and Mitch Gerrits. It's a 12-issue miniseries from, well, I won't say 10 years ago. I mean, it's not quite 10 years ago, but it's a while, unfortunately. I continue to age. And it is the post-war negotiations for peace between Mr. Miracle and his brother or half brother Calabac. And so they show up at a neutral site theoretically, or they take turns. They meet in an office basically, but it's an apocalyptic office, and they sit across the side from the table and they argue at each other, and then they leave, and we see Scott Free leave the room after having just been like really brave and bold in his statements. And then he's sort of worrying that he's blowing it or that he's bit off more than he can chew, or what are they hiding that I'm not seeing as we negotiate this settlement. And it really reflected a lot of the settlement agreements that I've been a part of. Typically in copyright law, where I used to practice before coming to Hollywood, there's not a whole lot of money at play usually. And so nobody wants to go to trial, which is, again, the opposite of what Elliott deals with. And so there's some, banging pots and pans and maybe filing a court case and maybe even getting past the preliminary injunction, phase where just before you start discovery, which is the expensive part. Discovery is like, hey, give me all of your paperwork that involved this contract. Give me all of your emails. And then you have to go through the emails and hire people to go through the emails and stuff. And that's really expensive, and often more expensive than the amount of money that's at issue in the copyright case. So they will typically stop before trial. Like they'll get right to the edge of discovery, and then they will try and have a negotiation for settlement. I thought that Tom King's in the Mr. Miracle series was very much like what I'd experienced as an attorney. And I actually talked to him about that one time. And Tad, you probably know better than I will, but I think what he told me was that, like, oh yeah, my mom and my dad are lawyers, or maybe just his mom or something like that. But that kind of talk was around the house constantly growing up.
His wife is a lawyer. His mother was the VP at I forget which company that essentially made DVDs a thing. So she was a Hollywood VP. So probably a lawyer too, but maybe even Warner Brothers. I don't remember.
And Brit,
so that to me, that like the emotion of that like really felt very real.
And Brit, to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, how you said that discovery is very expensive. Clients, I was on a panel at Comic Con this last weekend for public domain works, and somebody had asked, if Disney comes after you, for example, or like one of these big giants, what are your remedies? And is it worth pursuing? And I go, honestly, you can go after it if you have, even if you have all the cards on the table, everything lines up in favor for you. You will most likely not be able to afford to go after those big companies because of how much they will just bury you in legal fees.
Yeah.
And it is not financially worth it at that point. I'd say just move on to a different property if you get a
Yeah.
cease and desist letter from one of those major companies.
Not unless you have a lawyer or two in your back pocket who are willing to do an awful lot of work on spec.
Yeah. But that is
Yeah,
years and
or if you're willing
years.
to fight and lose too. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the public domain stuff is really interesting. The Art Baltazar is one of the
Mhm.
first people that I saw, at least, who legitimately used Mickey Mouse having entered into the public domain in a way that you would not have been able to do before. But when you were on the public domain panel, like, did they end up talking about comic books at all? Or
They did. It was primary. I was really just the legal, like they're fielding the law questions for,
Mhm.
just different public domain works because I was with some different creators who specifically do public domain. And I'm like, if you haven't gotten hit with a cease and desist, good for you. It might be coming, but just so you know,
Yeah,
because
well,
people
public
tend
domain
to
law is
be
really
too liberal
complicated.
with it. It is very
Mhm.
complicated. And then people
Yeah,
tend to
it's pretty
skirt
complicated.
skirt too much.
Really, I
Well,
should
it's
ask.
some people do, and some people stay away from things that they should be allowed to use because, like Happy Birthday, the song Happy Birthday should have been in the
Mhm.
public domain and it wasn't. People are often afraid to use things that are in the public domain because the main, like a smiley face, should be
Mhm.
in the public domain, but it actually is not. And the people who own it are really aggressive with the tactics. So unless you're willing to be the one to fight, the one who finally got Happy Birthday acknowledged as having been in the public domain for a very long time, um, you just kind of are stuck with it, kind of like what Elliot was saying.
Similarly, and this one's for my cousin Janelle, who may or may not be listening, but I'll toss it her direction. Talk to me about parody. Um, I mean, Britt, you were recently there when we did um, Constitution Illustrated and Declaration Emancipation Illustrated. Mad Magazine does parody, whatnot. Um, how do you stay? I mean, what's your advice for somebody who wants to use other characters or styles i- in a way that's legal? I mean, it gets, I mean, where are the lines there? How can you do or not do that?
You want to handle this easy question, or should I, Elliot?
I mean,
There are
parody
no
is just.
lines. So when people think of parody, they think of Weird Al, right? Weird Al is, some people feel that Weird Al is not parody. Some people feel that Weird Al is simply using an existing work to create a new work, or a derivative work. Whereas parody often is meant to specifically comment on the work that it is borrowing. If you think about it as an educational purpose, how do you talk about work without using the work? Use the work to the extent that you need it in order to make your education. But parody is, in theory, a similar notion. You are making a comment about the artist painting uh, who you find to be a sellout or whatever. And so you want to use that painting and you have dollar bills for eyeballs or something like that. Now you're making your comment, the painting and about the artist, you're parodying that work by commenting on it. And Weird Al isn't really commenting on Michael Jackson when he writes Eat It or something like that. He's just having some fun. Whereas he is commenting on Kurt Cobain when he does his parody of Smells Like Teen Spirit, where the point of the parody is you can't understand what this guy's saying. So those are two different types of parody, but that is lost on the owners of these works, I think, and it becomes not worth it for a lot of them to pursue it if it's close to parody. But then you get to some people who are super sensitive about it, like Louis Vuitton is really sensitive about things that should be classified as parody. Jack Daniels is another one. They try to be cool about it, but they're still sensitive about their branding, and they don't want to lose the quality of their branding, so they kind of feel compelled to go after certain people. And it's enormously complicated. As a guideline, is if you feel like you're borrowing from something but not commenting on it, you are probably steering further away from parody than what the law permits. As Elliot will tell you, it's case by case.
It is case by case, but also just for those listening as a general, bird's eye view, parody stem is an exception to the copyright rule, which is
Right.
where people who own the works ha own the rights to it, and then someone is trying to circumvent the copyright to not be sued for copyright infringement. But even if it is a parody, they could still be served with a cease and desist letter, which again leads to litigation and incurring legal fees. So that's where the danger of it comes in, because even if it is a parody of something and is an exception to the work, you could still wind up in court and still have to pay an enormous amount of legal fees to protect something that isn't necessarily worth protecting.
Right. What about, I mean, we all spend our time at comic conventions. What about fan art?
I mean, technically, that they could, people can come after them. There's nothing stopping that. If they see it, you could be served with a cease and desist letter on the show floor. You'd have to stop. It's
Yeah.
just they get away with it. I have a friend who, for the longest time, she did Disney sales on Etsy, like, her own Disney merch and stuff. And there's probably hundreds of thousands of people who do Disney merch on Etsy, but she got served with a cease and desist and had to stop. And she asked me, "Hey, what can I do about this?" I said, "You can stop doing what you're doing unless you want to pay more money than your house is probably worth in order to, defend this business that is really just a side business for you." So
Now,
fan art's not
if
really
you
allowed, but
if you do stop, are you still in any legal jeopardy? I mean, can they go after you for previous earnings? I mean, how does that work? I
they can
mean,
go
what's
after
the
you
Yes,
for everything
risk?
but
you've.
are they going to pay Elliot's hourly fee to do that? I mean, or my hourly fee, to do that? The people having been on the inside of some of those rooms, they typically write the cease and desist letter because they want it to stop, not because they're seeing it as a way to make their money back. The amount of money
Okay.
they're going to make back for somebody selling T-shirts or whatever is probably less than the amount of money it took to write the cease and desist letter. They're probably writing the cease and desist letter because they want it to stop for some whole other reason. The other reason might be that they have given the exclusive license to make. Actually, this is a case that I was just reading. I was reading my own writing. 20 years ago, when I was in law school, I wrote an article about City of Heroes, the video game City of Heroes, and it was a make your own superhero, massively multiplayer online. And you could make your own superhero, but if you really tried hard, you could make it look like Wolverine or Colossus and, or Batman. And so Marvel sued, and DC did not sue. Contributory infringement, basically, for building a tool that lets people change their characters. And part of the reason was, and remember, this is 20 years ago, 22 years ago, part of the reason was Marvel had sold an exclusive license to characters in a massively multiplayer game to whoever, Sony or who it was. And in order to, one of their obligations, one of their obligations is, one of their obligations to their partner was to maintain the exclusivity of their license. So they had to stop this infringer, because if they didn't, then they weren't doing their end of the deal. Whereas DC didn't have a similar problem.
And ultimately, sending out
That
the cease and desist is also just to send a message. And then usually, if a small-time creator gets a cease and desist letter, they're gonna stop what they're doing, and it's it's gonna scare the crap out of them because, like, oh my God, Marvel's coming after me for this. Like, I can't go up against them. So it's less about getting the money back. It's more about sending a message.
right.
And the message is stop doing that.
Elliot, I have a question. How often do companies want to hold on to the works that so imagining a creator and a small-time publisher, it's going to be different for Marvel and DC because they're not likely
Yeah,
to engage with somebody to do a creator-owned work without having it, very clearly defined with famous
right.
writers that who already have agents and reps and stuff. But if you've got somebody who's small-time and they get to publish their own work through a small-time publisher, and then something goes wrong and they want to take their rights back, kind of like you described, so they can walk the street and publish it somewhere else, or do whatever they want with the thing.
Mhm.
Why? What are the circumstances? Why does somebody hold on to those rights?
I'm currently in litigation with that very issue. And I still don't understand the reasoning why. My understanding is that these companies might believe that, no, we've invested X amount of money in this property. We want to see a return on our investment because ultimately it always comes down to money. But ultimately, the amount it costs them to even fight a suit is worth more than what the property is probably worth. So I don't truly understand where their minds are at, but ultimately it comes down to money and trying to recoup their investments like
Mm.
anything else.
Do they
But at
think
that level,
do, do they think that like someday they're like, oh, once we get our ducks in a row, we want to use these characters. I assume it's usually about characters. We want to use these characters in some other work, or is it just spite, or is it some cost fallacy? Like I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine like why.
I truly, even from a business perspective, to me, it makes no sense because why would
Mhm.
you hold on to a property that you're not doing anything with that you may not make that money back in the future, even if you do publish it? It could be spite, but I think ultimately it's either stubbornness or just the, I would say the hopeful belief that they might make their money back and not have made a bad investment with their investors.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I
When you
don't
make
feel
when
it's
you do
worth
a
it.
yeah, when you do a contract on the transactional side, when you're setting up a deal, or when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm contracting with this publisher, and this is the contract that they gave me." What
Mhm.
kinds of things do you typically advise people to look for in the paper and say, "This is something that you should either strike out, or this is where you should
Mhm.
ask for more, or this is where an escalation should happen at 40% instead of 30%, or whatever
Mhm.
the thing is."
Are we assuming that the contract has not been signed at this point?
Correct. Yes,
Okay, so for example,
and it's
this
specifically
was
for
an
comic book creators.
okay, because I was going to say I had one for non-comic book creators where somebody had a quick side note, then I'll get to comic book creators, where there was a hyperlink to a subset of rules on another website of this contract, and in like the fourth section, subsection like G, say by signing this contract, you waive all rights to sue. And no creator would ever read that far into a contract. And I went to my client, I said, I wouldn't wipe my ass with this. And
Mhm.
um, that was worth them paying my fee to tell them not to sign this contract. As far as like comic
Mhm.
book creators go, at least at my level where I've reviewed, because I haven't reviewed like I've reviewed a few big time contracts, but usually just advisory after the fact of like, am I good? Like, yeah, you're fine. But
Mhm.
why would they come to me beforehand? Um, where usually where usually it's the biggest thing is just making sure that intellectual property rights are there in case they want the books back, or like I said before, some type of breach or remedy and if they want out, like some type of out provision. But
Mhm.
typically they don't think about that, or I'll recommend it and they say, I'm still going to sign it. I'm like, great, I'll see you in a few months. But it's just my advice, whatever that's worth. But
Well, it
typically,
was
like,
worth $200.
apparently wasn't because people don't always want to pay it to read over a contract. But at least at I don't want to say lower levels, but with newer creators, the biggest thing is just protecting the intellectual property. And because the financials will come over time, but if you can at least control the intellectual property, I feel that you're able to at least control the negotiations a little better when something ultimately does go awry down the road. Because you have to assume that everything's going to go awry at some point. So how do you protect your client the most when they're going into these contracts and negotiations with publishers? If that
Yeah, that's a
answers
funny
the
thing, Tad, about doing.
No,
It
no,
does.
no.
It does. That's a funny thing, Tad, about doing contracts for creative people because we, as lawyers, are put in this adversarial position. I want it to be 100 and you want it to be 200, and we're going to fight about where it lands in between. But at the end of the day, your client has to work with my client. They have to sit
Right.
around a table and think of the funniest thing or the coolest adventure or whatever. So that's why, in part, why,
And
we have to
also
keep
your
that in
client
mind.
sometimes or at least Elliot's client, you've been on the other side a lot. Elliot's client sometimes just want to see their work in the world. It's a strong push. It's certainly something that some companies have absolutely been predatory about is, ooh, they'll do anything because they want this book out. Um,
and
have
people
you
see dollar
noticed
sign.
have you noticed, and I don't know how many different companies you've worked with, but like as a reader, I notice a difference in like I think of a Fantagraphics and a Drawn and Quarterly different than I think of uh, a Boom or a Dark Horse or a Vault. Just to stick with companies that haven't actually had significant legal problems recently. But you know, a lot of the ones that have had significant legal problems, you know, even looking at them, I went, okay, like they're doing great stuff, but how and are they taking care of their people? I mean, to the extent that like every once in a while, you know, it's reached a point where particularly in the companies that make monthly books that don't feel boutique, that feel corporate rather than like individually owned, etc. Like if they start doing amazing things before I start plugging them, I like am finding friends of mine who have done work for them to ask what it feels like. Are they getting paid on time? Blah, blah, blah. Because there's been such a track record otherwise. It seems like the comics industry has two different types of small publishers. The type that want to make comics and would prefer to make a profit, but they're not necessarily looking to 100 times over. You know, they're not looking for venture capital money in their returns. They're looking for not going broke in their returns and making comics. And there are other companies that seem to go, oh, comics are big, or comics IP are big money. I want to collect IP. I want massive returns. And they don't seem as interested in making comics. Is there something that you look for or have a feel for in terms of, first of all, I mean, from a lawyer's perspective, do you see that as well? Like a difference in the actual structures of the companies. But second, is there something that you look for in terms of like having a feel for, is this a company that's really worth doing business with?
At the end of the day, you said this, you said the common denominator, both, whether it's big, small, whether they want to make comics or want to make money, everyone wants to make money. It is a business at the end of the day. And regardless of if somebody wants to publish comics for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, the ultimate reason is the financial
Well,
gain.
but Elliot, I mean, even as you say that, like in non-comics, they talk about lifestyle businesses
Mhm.
versus I don't even know what they call the ones that the VC are normally willing to put their money into, but the when your average venture capitalist puts the money in, they're expecting to either not make anything back because it busted or make their money back 100 times over. And if they can't see a road to 100 times over, they're not interested. Right. Whereas there are lots of people that like making money is important because you can't stay in business without making money. But if they make enough money to keep everybody paid and fed well, uh, that's enough for them, you know. Um, I mean, and I mean, I know just from knowing different publishers that there is truth to that in the comics world. There are publishers that they're not gonna make a comic if they don't think they can make money off of it, but like they're not looking to get rich off of it. They're hoping to get rich off of it. You know, it's never a bad thing when they get rich off of it, but their goal is to make everybody money and keep making good comics. Do you get feels for that out of like looking at contracts, working with, I mean, I'm not asking you to like name any companies or whatnot, but like from an outsider perspective, like there seems to be a certain dichotomy, and sometimes even the ones that I think are more of the I want to make company, like there's at least one that has been in legal trouble lately, which is why again I won't name them, where it really does feel like they were I want to make comics, I want everybody to make money, and they're just bad at business, so they didn't make money, and that meant that nobody made money, and that you know, I mean, which is the problem with being I don't care about how much money I make as long as we can break even because you're working on smaller scales. But like for a young creator, or early creator, because they're not always young, um, like how do you make your decision in terms of, look, I want to have my stuff out there because I believe my stuff being out there makes it more likely that I will continue to be able to get work versus this is a company that I can't trust. I need to find one that maybe won't even pay me as well up front, but there's more reason to trust that they're not going to be trying to screw me over every opportunity. Is there any?
I would have three bits of advice for a creator in
Sure,
that position.
sure.
One would be hire a lawyer to vet them for you.
Right,
Number two, self-publish, because we live in a day and age where self-publishing is easier than ever. You own your own intellectual property, you control when your books come out, you control who participates in them, and then you don't have to worry about others. You can publish your own books, set up an LLC or whatever type of structure corporation you want, talk with your accountants on that. And you can file the copyrights, trademarks yourself, and go to conventions and crowdfund and all that stuff and start from the ground up. That is a legitimate way of, ensuring that your work gets out there. It might take longer and it requires a lot more legwork, but it can be done. And then the third option would be just, vai con Dios, just go with God and see what happens with that first book. If it goes out and you give up all your rights and you're okay with that, write another book and just keep going.
right,
That would be the three. It'd be make your own book, make your own company, hire a lawyer to vet for you, or be okay with potentially losing the work that you worked on and move on to the next project.
right.
Yeah, I think that
I have
tracks. I think that's
follow-ups
all really
on,
good advice.
yeah, no, that totally tracks to me. I have follow-ups on two of those things.
Mhm.
In terms of if they hired, say, you as the lawyer, what that's not proprietary do you do to try to vet a company?
I mean, you're going to look at previous clients, previous publications, if they're do they do conventions? Do they have other media publications? Do they have other IPs? What IPs are they working with? What creatives they worked with? I look up where the company's headquartered and seen the local circuit court if they've had any lawsuits or things like that.
Okay.
Because a lot of that stuff isn't necessarily going to be public, but you have to know where to look for it in the court system.
Well, and that's why
Um,
I was asking the question because I wanted you to give an opportunity for why a lawyer will do this better than you can.
Oh, because we're going to be able to find stuff that the public won't have access to
Well,
because this is a term.
well, and also because you know the right. I mean, as you pointed out, like, oh, find their jurisdiction and look to see if they've been sued. I don't know if a lot of creators would even think of that right off the bat.
That's why we
You
get paid
know.
the medium to big bucks.
No, no, I totally get that. Um,
Elliot also knows where the bodies are buried in a certain way. If you want help setting up a contract, it's nice to be working with somebody who has seen the effect of not setting up a contract well. So Elliot
right.
knows what are the terms that are most likely to get somebody to be in such a bad pickle that they hire him a couple months from now to try and get the rights back or to solve whatever problem it is. So he now knows that, like, I always used to give this example, and it turns out it was a foolish example. But when somebody would look at a contract and say, "Gee whiz, there's all this boilerplate. Should I go through each and every point and make a comment?" And part of me would say, like, you're wasting your time. Like, if this clause here about the volcano, that's going to erupt in the middle of the city, if a volcano really does erupt in the middle of the city, they got bigger fish to fry than whether or not you get paid. And so why are you wasting your time and energy fighting over the wording of the volcano clause? But of course, that volcano clause is force majeure. And it in
Yep.
fact did matter in March of 2020, what the language was in that contract. So somebody like Elliot can cut to the chase where an individual might have to sit there and do all that research and look at every single clause and still never know from experience what are the clauses that really matter. When I first got to showbiz, somebody said that the two things that really matter the most to the talent are the credit and the money. And that was specifically talking about voice actors. But there's always something that matters the most to the client, that matters the most to the company, and the company has certain places where they can wiggle and certain places where they can't. And an experienced attorney and somebody who's done it before and who's in Elliott's position will know these are things that are worth asking for. These are things that they always say no to and you can't do anything about. And these are things that you could waste your time fighting about it if there's some specific reason it matters to you. But by and large, this is not going to be an issue. Low
Right.
risk.
And that's low risk, high reward, and high risk, high reward. Those are going to be the biggest things that you have to be able to look for. And it's even just as much as one word, just shall and may. A lot of contracts and statutes, if it says shall, that's what's going to be. If it says may, there's more room in there. And, that ambiguity can be the difference between a few $100,000 or tens, depending on what level you're working at. But
And then my follow-up to if you start your own, um, what pieces of legal advice would you give right off the bat to somebody who's self-publishing? What what
the
what big things should they not overlook?
the first thing that I would advise is obviously getting your FEIN number, your federal why am I blanking on the full name, Britt? Everything
Yeah,
because
it's essentially your IRS number.
the social security number for your business. So set up an LLC, S corp, whatever you want that to be. I usually advise LLC because it's the simplest. Don't do a sole proprietorship because then you're going to incur a lot more potential liability as opposed to if you do an LLC where it would have to go through the business and they can't go after your personal expenses. They could go after what the business is worth. That's the whole thing. Number one, set up the LLC. Number two, get an accountant. Number three, get a lawyer. And ensure whatever works you're doing. I always advise clients copyright the scripts, copyright everything before the book work even gets out there because you're going to be sharing your script with creators and other people. And is it worth it to protect the scripts? That's just me being cautious. I still feel it's worth it. And then just ensure that you're copywriting everything along the way. And then if you have a business name, trademark the business name. So I'll just say, create the business, protect the business, hire the people to help continue to protect the business and make sure everything's staying afloat.
I like that as good advice. Britt, do you have any other legal questions? Otherwise, I'm going to ask you both
No,
one more comics question and then get to standard closing questions for Elliott.
no, other than I think I know where Bruce Wayne went to law school. I think that's a known thing. I was just thinking about like comic book lawyer trivia stuff,
Did
the
Bruce
most
Wayne
famous
go to
lawyers,
law school?
Wait,
like
feel like
sure he did. Yes.
I
But
didn't.
that's, a
Bruce Wayne had
45-year-old story.
I didn't realize Bruce Wayne had ever gone to law school.
Yeah, like Jerry Conway or Paul Levitz or one of those guys a million years
huh?
ago had him go to law school.
Wow.
Yale University at Gotham, apparently.
Okay. Okay.
And the some of the more famous law firms in comics are, Wayne and Murdoch, but also
You mean Nelson and
Grayson
Murdoch?
Krantz.
Nelson and Murdoch.
Excuse me. What did I say?
You said Wayne
Wayne.
and Murdoch.
Oh, Wayne and Murdoch. Okay, yeah. Think about the last
I
one.
mean, it's not.
And then Cranston and Grayson, I think was the Earth 2 Robin when he became an adult. He became a lawyer.
Was it? I didn't
Might
know
have been
that.
Cranston, Wayne, and Grayson, because I think Helena Wayne
Right.
might have also gone to law school out there. And then, of course, She-Hulk, as an attorney.
Well, and that was my question for you guys. Matt Murdock, Jennifer Walters, or Foggy Nelson, if you've got to hire a lawyer in the Marvel universe.
What did I do?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. It depends on what it's like because people think that you go to one lawyer for anything when it's like going to a doctor. Like you're not going to go
No,
to
I
a
know.
foot
I
doctor
know.
for head pain.
Right.
So if you did a crime, you're going to Murdoch. If you needed some type of other representation, like in a civil proceeding, you're going to go to why am I blanking on She-Hulk's name?
Jennifer
Jennifer
Walters.
Walters,
Jennifer
yeah.
Walters.
That makes sense.
It depends. What's the
I
one you
like
go
it.
with?
I like it. I like it. Those are good answers. I mean, it's one of the things that I tell people, because I know a lot of lawyers, so I have people who will, come to me and they're like, I need a lawyer for this, and like they're always shocked when I say, no, I don't have anyone for that. I can make a phone call and see if any of the ones I have know about that, but how can you because law gets really
Okay,
specific.
I have an answer
You
for you.
don't
If I
have an
don't care if I
entertainment
win or
lawyer do
lose,
divorce.
yeah, if I don't care that much if I win or lose, I'll take Jen Walters because I think she's the most interesting and the most fun. And if I do care if I win or lose, I'm probably going with Foggy Nelson because I'm least likely to have like my judge murdered by an alien invasion or the courtroom disrupted. Oh, and he'll also answer my calls. Like I don't know that
Yeah.
when Daredevil is like tied up by Kingpin or whatever that he's not really answering my call about whether or not we filed the
He could miss
12B6
he could
on
miss
time or
court
whatever.
appearances because he's going after Bullseye.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but so Foggy's going to be your lawyer anyway, right?
Well, I will say though, so with that though, that is part of how I got into the comic book aspect of law because I primarily do criminal defense litigation and I'm in court. I do trial work all the time. And, I'm no stranger to the discovery process and just trial proceeding and criminal proceedings and court proceedings. So when it came to transferring those skills to comic book law, it was pretty seamless for me because then it was similar process, just a different avenue.
Oh, cool. All right, Elliot, my standard closing questions. The first is I'm in the fifth year of this podcast, actually
Congratulations.
rapidly approaching the 5 year anniversary, a couple months away. And I feel like I've entered the Twilight Zone. Um, I mean, I have Brit on speed dial when I have like entertainment law questions. I hang out with people that I used to only see as like a name at the front of my favorite books.
Mhm.
Um, I get to talk to so many people. I've gotten to see so many just amazing things, take part in so many conversations. Again, like I feel like half of my life for the last 5 years. If you told me 10 years ago it was going to be my life, I would have gone, you're fucking insane. And B, I still just kind of pinch myself and go, was that really me sitting in that room when that happened or whatever? And I find that that's like really true of most people in the arts, but especially everybody in comics. It's a small community with a lot of cool people. Um, so I started collecting surreal experiences.
Mhm.
Tell me one of the experiences you've had since you became more involved with comics that you wouldn't have had if you weren't involved with comics, that you just sit back and go, oh my God, that was really Elliott Mondry that got to do that.
I would say actually just last week at San Diego Comic-Con, so the book that I wrote and created called You Never Know deals with mental health and how you never know what people are going through behind closed doors and how strong a hold anxiety can have on someone. When I was writing the story, when I was in therapy a couple of years ago, I would listen to this band, The Funeral Portrait, a lot. And the music really inspired me, and it's inspired the name of our company, one of their songs. And I was at Comic Con and able to give the lead singer of The Funeral Portrait, who was at Comic Con, a copy of the book that they
Oh,
inspired.
wow. Oh, that's so
And
cool.
yeah, and he gave me a big hug and thanked me for what we did. I was able to thank him, and he actually reached out to me on Instagram and said, let's talk in a month or so. And it was like, what just happened? So that was a
Just so long as
really,
that let's talk in a month or so isn't the cease or desist because you used a line from their songs.
no, but if that does happen, I at least know who I'm calling.
Actually, Britt, you haven't been a guest on the show in a long time. You've been co-hosting either episodes here or our book club. So you haven't gotten that question from me. You want to answer it too?
Yeah, I've had a lot of them. I felt extraordinarily lucky when I first got to go into the DC Comics offices when I did my internship. I was trying to play it cool, like I was there to be a lawyer and not to be a fan. I definitely was like pretending I had some folder I needed to deliver to some floor so that I could walk by the Superpowers dolls collection that was on the wall, or that's Paul Levitz's office, or my God, the greatest one was I pretended I had to do some research and I went up into the DC Comics library where they had leather bound to look like law books, all all of the entire history of publishing in DC Comics. So I walked to like the 1940s section, and I found an old Charles Atlas ad. That's what I was pretending to look for. I did need it for a paper I was writing, but I also could have gotten it anywhere, you know. And it was so cool to just go up there, and I'm like, how many minutes can I hang out here and still, you know, have nobody wonder
Figuring
where
out
I've
how to
gone.
pad the bill when you're just an intern.
Nobody cared, um, but I did have one happen a couple of days ago, which was Joe Duffy, the editor from Marvel, and who also
Yeah.
was a writer a long time ago. So I met her at, I want to say, New York Comic Con a couple of years ago. Maybe it was San Diego, I forget. But I met her. I just like hung out with her at her table and chit chatted for a minute, and then friended her on Facebook. Um, and then she, like 2 weeks ago, I guess the photo of us together, that like the selfie that I, you know, put online or whatever on Facebook or whatever, it must have popped up in her memories. And so she wrote something like, I remember having a really great conversation with Brit Payne 2 years ago. I wish I could do that again sometime. And I was like, oh my God, Joe Duffy like remembers me. That's crazy. So those kinds of
Well,
things have been really
I'm just going
nice.
to tell you that I'd love to have her on the show. So if she wants to have a really great conversation with you on a podcast, you can let her know.
Mhm.
I mean,
Will.
she's got a hell of a resume.
He does, yeah. And she's super nice. She's really great.
Yeah, yeah. So just throwing that out there. And I wonder
Shameless
if
plug.
I always, sometimes that's the only way you get anywhere. Um, you know, I try not to be that you must get me in contact with, but I will totally be the guy that says, "Hey, you know this." And Britt does it to me. He goes, "Hey,
I
do
do.
you have contact to this person?" And I say, "Yes, I
Mhm.
do. Let me send an email." So, it's he scratches my back, I scratch his, and we like comics.
It's all about
That
who
is
you
all
know and
true.
helping each other in the industry.
Right, right. Okay, final question. Elliot, tell me something you love, preferably a comic, but we don't have rules. Preferably storytelling, but again with the rules. But something that you love that not enough people around you have experienced, and you'd really like them to, so that you had more people to talk about it with.
I remember I answered this the last time I was on the podcast, and
Uh-huh.
I have to think about something else that isn't the same thing now.
I don't remember what you answered, but if it immediately like jogs my memory, yeah, I'll make you think of something else. So if you remember what you answered, you
Of
should try
course.
to come up with something else.
Hmm. I'm gonna try to come up. I gotta try to come up with something else now on the spot. You put me in an interesting position, Ted.
You knew it was
Uh,
coming if you
you,
remembered it from last time.
well, I remember my answer from last time, but I
Ah,
forgot.
you forgot the question.
So,
I forgot
Elliot,
the
I'm going to give you a
question.
minute to think. I'm going to use this as an
Thank you.
opportunity to give half mine. So, there's an old Spider-Man comic book series called Spidey Super Stories from the 1970s. It was a co-production with Electric Company, basically, which is sort of like saying a co-production with Sesame Street for people who aren't familiar with the era. And it was a 53 or 57, I don't know, something in the 50s run of original Spider-Man stories. It also had some stories published in Electric Company magazine. Electric Company was a show like Sesame Street, TV show like Sesame. And because it was this co-production, because it was handshake paperwork, it has not been able to be reprinted since it was originally published. Then they did one collection of it around 1980, and that was it. It was not a complete collection. The original issues are very hard to get a hold of physically. You can get them digitally relatively easily, as I've discovered. And I just feel like it's something that should be more widely available. Like, for if they can reprint ROM, if they can reprint Micronauts, they ought to be able to figure out how to reprint Spidey Super Stories, because I have found them to be a very valuable, and this was their original intent, was to be a bridge for younger readers who were a little bit behind and who had aged out of little kid books and the way they looked and felt and the kinds of stories they told, but their reading skills had not developed to the point where they were able to read real comic books, or the next level up for stories. So these books kind of filled in the gap. They look like regular comic books. They had John Romita Sr. as the art director, so it was all in his 70s style. They looked the same as the big boy comic books that were on the stands at the time, but they had a simplified vocabulary. They had less violence. They had more sort of hippie style presentation, and they were a great bridge for my son getting from those little kid books to reading prose books, or even just other modern comic books. So I think Spidey. Oh, here he is. Here's Spidey Super Stories. I think they should be more available. Buddy, speak of the devil. And so
Well,
that's something that I wish more people were able to know about. I think that Abrams Press should get on this and and I would be happy to help to the extent that I could. I think Marvel would probably do it. I think that the successors of the company and Sesame Workshop, I think that they are not interested in it. So
well,
I don't think they would ever let it
what
happen.
what I will say, Britt, is the comic that I never ever ever expected to see on Marvel Unlimited recently popped up on our Marvel Unlimited, which is the Marvel team up Spider-Man and the not ready for primetime players.
Mhm.
So
I have that one.
it's not
I have that in the other
impossible.
room.
It's not impossible. Yeah,
It's
I
not
have that.
impossible, and it should be easy. And I'm certain, I'm sure there are plenty of people who would be happy to try and help make it work. But it seems that Sesame Street's a little bit of a black box. Like they don't necessarily give you reasoning. They're busy with the things that they're doing, and they're not in the publishing game, and so there's no real incentive for them to step forward and put the effort into it. But I think it's worth putting the effort in for the reasons that I just.
Yeah. Talk to me off the air. I might hook you up with somebody. Elliot, was that enough time to
That
to
was
to come up with something?
that was the perfect amount of time to stall for. So thank you,
Glad I could
Brent. Um,
help.
something something that I love in comic books that I don't feel like enough people know about is one of my dear friend Kaj Kunstman, their book Warhead. It is a mental health book about this person who has a atom bomb for a head, and he feels that if he doesn't get his shit together, the world's going to explode. And it's a beautiful portrayal of mental health as a mental health creator. To me, it's one of the few books I've read that truly captures mental health from a male's perspective. And beautiful series. There's 3 volumes to it, and I remember reading it from San Diego Comic Con to when I was going to Tampa to take the bar exam for Florida, and I was crying on the plane because it was so beautiful. And I feel more people should read more stories like that that make you want to cry in a good way.
All right. I love that. I just pulled it up on Tumblr, so I may
Yeah, it looks
be
cool.
looking at some of that soon. Um, I'm gonna toss out my teeny bit of Joe Duffy minutia that I discovered as I fell down the rabbit hole after Britt mentioned his thing, which is I had thought of Joe Duffy as a Daredevil writer, um, and quickly discovered that she only co-wrote one Daredevil comic. But the reason I thought of her as a writer is I have that comic and it's in like my distinct run because it is she co-wrote the last issue before Frank Miller started penciling.
Mm.
So it was with Roger McKenzie, who was the original writer when Miller started penciling. Klaus Janson was already inking, and it was, but it was still Gene Colan on pencils. Um,
Cool.
which when I got into Miller Daredevil, I've told this story a few times, but I don't think Elliot's heard it. It was like before the internet, so I had to kind of guess where his run started and where it didn't. And like most comic shops don't you want you to like pull the comic out of the bag before you buy it. So, it's like I knew what the earliest issue I had was, and I just looked before that and looked after that until I finally had this chunk where I had everything. And so I actually have like 10 or so before he started, that sort of thing. And that's why her name has always been in my head as a Daredevil writer. I actually wonder if she was also an editor on the book for a while too. Because I don't have the steady list in front of me of all the books she edited. But Joe Duffy is cool. And I like that she enjoyed talking to Brit because I enjoy talking to Brit too. I also enjoy talking to Elliott, and I thank you both for joining me tonight. This has been 22 Panels with Elliott Mondry, and we will see you after the next page.